When my daughter-in-law told me I was just a guest in my own son's home, I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply smiled and walked away. That smile, it wasn't strength. It was pain, quiet, deep pain, the kind that hides behind silence. I had spent most of my life building a home for my son. I watched him take his first steps on these same floors, taught him how to tie his shoes, stayed awake during his fevers, and saved every coin to give him a better life. And one day, that very home, the one I built with my dreams, became a place where I no longer belonged. This is my story, not of revenge, not of anger, but of a mother learning to let go with love, not bitterness. My name is Margaret, and I'm 64 years old. I live in a small town outside Portland, Oregon. For most of my life, it was just me and my son, Daniel. His father passed away when Daniel was only 10. Since then, I've worn every hat: mother, father, teacher, and friend. We didn't have much, but we had love. Every night, we'd eat dinner together, just the two of us. He'd talk about his dreams to be an engineer, to buy me a small garden house by the lake someday. I'd listen and smile, feeling proud that my little boy had such a big heart. Years passed, and Daniel grew into a fine young man. He got a good job, met a lovely girl named Sophie, and soon after, they got married. At first, I was truly happy for them. Sophie was polite, kind, and always smiling. But sometimes, a smile hides more than it shows. When they first moved into our family home, I was thrilled. It felt like life was full again. Laughter in the kitchen, footsteps in the hallway, someone to share morning tea with. But slowly, small things began to change. One morning, I noticed Sophie rearranging my kitchen cabinets. She said gently, "Mom, I'm just trying to make things more organized." I nodded and smiled, but inside, I felt a little displaced, like a guest watching someone else's home being set up. Then, it was about dinner. She wanted things cooked differently. "Daniel doesn't really like your old recipes anymore," she said once, laughing lightly. Her words stung, but I didn't respond. Soon, my role in the home began to shrink. She took over everything: meals, decisions, decorations. Even Daniel started consulting her before speaking to me. If I suggested something, he'd say, "Mom, Sophie knows better about these things now." I tried to tell myself it was just adjustment. After all, new marriages need space. But that space kept pushing me further into the background. One night, as I sat alone on the porch, I overheard them talking inside. Daniel's voice was low, but I heard Sophie clearly. "She's always around, Daniel. It doesn't feel like our home." It was a rainy afternoon when everything changed. Sophie came into my room, her tone unusually firm. "Mom," she began, "I think it's time you took a little break. Maybe visit your sister for a few months." I looked up, surprised. "A break?" I asked softly. "Am I in your way?" She hesitated for a moment. Then she sighed. "It's not that. It's just, Daniel and I need privacy. We need our own life. You've done so much already, but this house should feel like ours now." I wanted to tell her this house was built by my hands, every brick, every corner. But I said nothing. I just nodded and whispered, "Of course, dear." That evening, I packed a small bag. Daniel came into my room. "Mom, please don't take this the wrong way," he said, his voice trembling. "Sophie just wants us to build our own memories." I smiled faintly. "I understand, son. You're a husband now." He hugged me tightly, and for a second, I thought he might tell me to stay. But he didn't. As the rain poured outside, I quietly walked toward the front door. When I turned to take one last look, Sophie stood behind Daniel, her arms crossed. She didn't look angry, just relieved. "Take care." "Mom," Daniel said softly. I nodded. "I always do." When the door closed behind me, it wasn't just a door. It was the sound of a chapter ending. I moved in with my sister for a few weeks. She lived in a small place by the lake. The air there was peaceful, quiet enough to hear my own thoughts. Every night, I'd replay that day in my head. Sophie's words echoed again and again. This house should feel like ours now. Was I really in their way? Had I unknowingly smothered their happiness? I remembered how I used to pray for Daniel's future, how I worked 2 jobs just to afford his college. But now, I wondered, had I given too much? One afternoon, I went through an old photo album. There was Daniel's first school picture. There we were, smiling, carefree. Back then, Love felt simple. Tears fell on the photographs before I realized I was crying. It's strange, isn't it? You spend your whole life giving your heart to someone, and one day you realize they've built a new life, one where you don't quite fit anymore. But life has a quiet way of healing. After a few months, Daniel called. He sounded different, distant, yet gentle. "Mom, I've been meaning to visit you," he said. "Sophie's pregnant." My heart jumped. "Really?" I asked, smiling through tears. "That's wonderful news." He hesitated before saying, "Yeah, we'll figure out how to manage things." I wanted to visit, to help, to be there for them. But I remembered Sophie's words. Privacy, our own life. So I stayed silent. Months passed before I finally met my granddaughter, Lily. Daniel brought her to see me one Sunday. He looked tired, pale, overwhelmed. Sophie didn't come. When I held Lily in my arms, I felt something awaken inside me, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and suddenly, everything felt worth it again. "She looks just like you," I told Daniel. He smiled faintly. "She cries just like you too." We both laughed quietly. And for a moment, I saw my son again, the little boy who used to hold my hand when crossing the street. Before he left, Daniel hugged me. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, "for everything." I didn't ask what he meant. I just held him tight and said, "I know, son. I know." Time moved on. Sophie never apologized, and maybe she never will, but I've stopped waiting for it. Now, I live in a small rented cottage near the lake. I spend my mornings tending to a little garden, the same dream Daniel once promised me. Sometimes, when he visits with Lily, we sit by the water, watching the sunset. He always brings groceries, fixes things around the house, and talks about work. I can tell he's trying to rebuild what once broke. And I let him, because forgiveness isn't about words. It's about peace. I don't hold anger in my heart anymore. I realize something simple. You can't force a place where you no longer belong, but you can always build a new one, filled with love, even if it's smaller, quieter, and just your own. Sometimes I think about that day, the day Sophie called me a guest. Those words used to hurt. Now, they remind me of growth. I was a guest, yes, but not in my son's home, in his journey. My part in his story was meant to guide him until he could walk alone. And when he finally did, I had to let go. Letting go doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you love differently from a distance, quietly, without demands. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Every mother must face a moment when her home no longer echoes with her child's voice. And that's okay. Because love doesn't end when they walk away. It simply changes its shape, from presence to memory, from holding on to blessing them silently. And now, as I watch the sun set beyond the lake, I whisper a prayer, not for things to go back, but for peace in all our hearts. After all, I may have lost my place in their home, but I found my peace in mine. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about life, love, and letting go.